Grandma, please, I can't breathe here. Save me from this nightmare. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My grandson's voice, usually so full of life, now trembled with fear. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. Jonah? What's wrong, sweetheart? I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. I can't talk now. She might hear me. Please, Grandma, just come get me. The line went dead. I stared at the silent phone, my mind reeling. What nightmare was Jonah living in? And who was this she he was so afraid of? My name is Marlowe, and I thought I knew my family. I was wrong. I grabbed my car keys, my hands shaking. The drive to Eli and Lila's house felt like an eternity. My son and his wife had always seemed like the perfect couple, doting parents to my precious grandson. But Jonah's desperate plea echoed in my ears, shattering that illusion. As I pulled into their driveway, I saw Lila's silhouette in the window. She was pacing, gesticulating wildly. I couldn't hear her words, but her body language screamed anger. I marched up to the front door and rang the bell. Silence fell inside the house. After a moment, Lila opened the door, her face a mask of forced pleasantness. "Marlowe," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "What a surprise. We weren't expecting you." I pushed past her into the house. "Where's Jonah?" Lila's smile faltered for a second. "He's in his room, doing homework. You know how busy he is with school." "I'd like to see him," I said, already heading for the stairs. Lila's hand shot out, gripping my arm. "Now's not a good time, Marlowe. Why don't you come back this weekend?" I yanked my arm free. "I'm here now, Lila. And I'm seeing my grandson." As I climbed the stairs, I heard Lila hiss, "Eli, your mother's here." I found Jonah's door closed. I knocked softly. "Jonah? It's Grandma." The door cracked open, and Jonah's pale face appeared. His eyes were red-rimmed, his cheeks tear-stained. Without a word, he threw himself into my arms. "Oh, sweetheart," I murmured, holding him tight. "What's going on?" Before Jonah could answer, Eli appeared in the hallway. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I looked at my son, over Jonah's head. "I got a call. Jonah needed me." Eli's brow furrowed. "A call? Jonah, you know you're not supposed to use your phone during study time." Jonah stiffened in my arms. I felt a surge of protectiveness. "Eli, something's wrong here." Jonah called me in tears, begging for help. "Don't be ridiculous, Mom," Eli said, but I saw uncertainty flicker in his eyes. "Everything's fine, right, Jonah?" Jonah pulled away from me, his eyes darting between his father and me. I just... Lila appeared behind Eli, her face a storm cloud. "Jonah, go finish your homework." "Marlowe, I think it's time for you to leave." I stood my ground. "I'm not going anywhere until I know what's going on in this house." Lila's eyes narrowed. "Oh, Marlowe, here to save the day again? Maybe if you spent less time meddling, you'd see things clearly." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. I looked at Jonah, saw the fear in his eyes, and made a decision. Whatever was happening in this house, I was going to get to the bottom of it. My grandson needed me, and I wouldn't let him down. "This isn't over," I said, my voice low and determined. "Not by a long shot." As I left the house, Lila's words followed me. "It never is with you, is it, Marlowe?" I got into my car, my mind racing. Something was very wrong in my son's home, and I had a sinking feeling that Lila was at the center of it all. One thing was certain, I would do whatever it took to protect Jonah, even if it meant tearing this family apart to save it. I couldn't shake the unease that clung to me after leaving Eli and Lila's house. Jonah's frightened face haunted me, his silent plea for help echoing in my mind. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. The next morning, I drove back to their neighborhood, parking a block away. I'd wait, watch, and hopefully catch a moment alone with Jonah. As luck would have it, I spotted him trudging towards the bus stop, shoulders slumped. I pulled up beside him. "Jonah, honey, get in." His head snapped up, relief flooding his features. He glanced around nervously before climbing in. "Grandma, what are you doing here?" "I couldn't stop worrying about you. Talk to me, sweetheart. What's going on at home? Jonah's eyes welled up.
Mom.
She's different when you're not around. She says awful things. Makes me feel worthless. My heart clenched. What kind of things, Jonah? He shook his head, fear creeping back into his expression. I can't. She'll know I told you. I reached out, squeezing his hand. I won't let anything happen to you, I promise. Just then, a car horn blared behind us. Lila's sleek sedan pulled up, her face a mask of fury behind the wheel. Jonah, get out of that car right now. I turned to my grandson. You don't have to go with her if you don't want to. Conflict warred on his face. Finally, he whispered, I'm sorry, Grandma, and slipped out of the car. Lila stormed over, grabbing Jonah's arm. What do you think you're doing, Marlo? Trying to kidnap my son? I was giving my grandson a ride to school, I said, keeping my voice level. Is that a crime now? Her eyes narrowed. Stay away from my family. You're poisoning Jonah's mind with your interference. The only poison here is coming from you, Lila, I shot back. She laughed, a brittle sound. Oh, Marlo, here to save the day again? Maybe if you spent less time meddling, you'd see things clearly. I watched helplessly as she dragged Jonah to her car. As they drove away, I caught a glimpse of his face in the rear window, eyes pleading for help. That evening, I called Eli. We need to talk about what's happening with Jonah. Mom, please, he sighed. Everything's fine. Lila told me about your little stunt this morning. You can't just show up and try to take Jonah. I wasn't taking him anywhere.
I'm worried about him, Eli.
Can't you see something's wrong? The only thing wrong is you overstepping, Mom. Lila's a good mother. She takes care of us. I bit back a frustrated scream. Open your eyes, Eli. Your son is suffering. I think you should take a step back, he said coldly. Give us some space. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, anger and fear warring inside me. How could Eli be so blind? Later that night, I jolted awake to my phone buzzing. A text from an unknown number. Grandma, please help. Mom's on a rampage. Dad won't do anything. I'm scared. My blood ran cold. I threw on clothes and raced to my car. As I sped towards Eli's house, my mind raced. What was I walking into? How bad had things gotten? I pulled up to see lights blazing in every window. Muffled shouting leaked through the walls. Taking a deep breath, I marched up to the front door and pounded on it. Eli yanked it open, his face a storm cloud. Mom, what are you doing here? I pushed past him. Where's Jonah? Lila appeared, her eyes wild. Get out of my house. Not without seeing my grandson, I said firmly. A crash from upstairs made us all freeze. Then Jonah's voice raw with tears. Just leave me alone. I locked eyes with Eli. Still think everything's fine? For the first time, I saw doubt flicker in my son's eyes. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't rest until Jonah was safe and this family's dark secrets were dragged into the light. The morning after the explosive confrontation at Eli's house, I found myself sitting across from Iris at our favorite cafe. My hands shook as I clutched my coffee mug, recounting the events of the past few days. I don't know what to do, Iris, I confessed. Jonah's clearly suffering, but Eli's in denial and Lila. She's like a fortress I can't breach. Iris leaned forward, her eyes filled with concern. Marlo, you need concrete evidence. Without it, it's just your word against Lila's. But how? Jonah's too scared to speak up and Eli won't listen. Iris paused, then said softly, Sometimes, Marlo, the truth hides in the silence. You need to listen to what's not being said. Her words struck a chord. What are you suggesting? I hate to say it, but have you considered recording what's happening in that house? I recoiled. You mean spy on them? That's illegal, isn't it? Iris shrugged. It's a gray area. But if it means protecting Jonah, the idea gnawed at me. It felt wrong, invasive. But then I remembered Jonah's terrified face, his desperate pleas for help. What choice did I have? I'll think about it, I said finally. That afternoon, I found myself parked outside Eli's house again. My heart raced as I watched Lila's car pull out of the driveway.
This was my chance.
I knocked on the door, plastering on a smile when Eli answered. Hi, honey. I thought I'd stop by and apologize for the other night. Can we talk? Eli hesitated, then nodded. Come in, Mom. As we sat in the living room, making awkward small talk, I discreetly pulled out the tiny audio recorder I'd bought that morning. My hands trembled as I activated it and slipped it behind a photo frame. Is Jonah home? I asked casually. He's upstairs doing homework, Eli replied. Mom, about last night? I cut him off. It's okay, Eli. I know I overstepped. I just worry, that's all. Our conversation meandered, neither of us addressing the elephant in the room. After about an hour, I made my excuses to leave. Do you mind if I use the bathroom before I go?
I asked.
Once upstairs, I slipped into Jonah's room. My grandson was hunched over his desk, not even looking up as I entered. Jonah? I whispered. He startled, turning to me with wide eyes. Grandma, what are you doing here? I crossed the room, pulling him into a tight hug. I'm trying to help you, sweetheart. I need you to trust me, okay? Jonah nodded against my shoulder. I quickly placed another recorder under his desk, praying he wouldn't find it. Stay strong, I murmured. I love you. As I left the house, guilt and determination warred within me. What I'd done felt wrong, but the alternative, leaving Jonah in that toxic environment, was unthinkable. The next few days were agony. I jumped every time my phone rang, half expecting Lila to have discovered the recorders. But nothing happened. Finally, a week later, I returned to retrieve them. My hands shook as I downloaded the audio files onto my computer. For hours, I listened. Most of it was mundane homework discussions, TV in the background. But then I heard it. Lila's voice, dripping with venom. You ungrateful little brat, she hissed. After everything I do for you, this is how you repay me? You're worthless, just like your father. Jonah's muffled sobs tore at my heart. I'm sorry, Mom. I'll do better, I promise. You think Grandma cares? Lila sneered. She doesn't. You're just a burden, Jonah. To everyone. I slammed the laptop shut, ball rising in my throat. The truth was worse than I'd imagined. Lila wasn't just cold or strict. She was emotionally abusive, systematically destroying Jonah's self-esteem. As the shock wore off, determination set in. I had my evidence now. It was time to confront this situation head-on, no matter the cost. Jonah's future depended on it. I picked up my phone, my finger hovering over Eli's number. This call would change everything, but I was ready. For Jonah, I'd move heaven and earth. And Lila? She was about to learn that hell hath no fury like a grandmother scorned. My hands trembled as I replayed the recordings for the third time. Each word from Lila's mouth was like a dagger to my heart, confirming my worst fears about Jonah's home life. You're nothing but a disappointment, Lila's voice hissed through the speakers. No wonder your father can't stand to be around you. Jonah's muffled sobs tore at my soul. I'm sorry, Mom. I'll do better, I promise. You think Grandma cares? Lila sneered. She doesn't. You're just a burden, Jonah. To everyone. I slammed the laptop shut, ball rising in my throat. The evidence was irrefutable. Lila wasn't just strict or cold. She was systematically destroying Jonah's self-esteem, isolating him from everyone who loved him. My phone buzzed. A text from Eli. Mom, can we talk? Something's not right with Jonah. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation ahead. Come over, I replied. An hour later, Eli sat across from me, his face etched with worry. I don't know what to do, Mom. Jonah's grades are slipping. He barely talks anymore. Lila says he's just being dramatic, but you know that's not true. I finished for him. Eli nodded, his eyes filling with tears. What's happening to my family? I reached for his hand. Eli, there's something you need to hear. With a heavy heart, I played him select portions of the recordings. Eli's face crumpled as he listened to Lila's venomous words and Jonah's broken responses. No, he whispered. This can't be real. Lila wouldn't. She loves Jonah. This is how she treats him when you're not around. I said gently. Eli, your son is suffering. Eli stood abruptly, pacing the room. How did you get these recordings? Did you spy on us? I met his gaze steadily. I did what I had to do to protect my grandson. This is illegal. Eli exploded. You had no right. I had every right. I shot back. Jonah called me begging for help. What was I supposed to do? Stand by and watch him be destroyed. Eli collapsed back into his chair, head in his hands. I can't believe this is happening. Believe it, I said firmly. Now the question is, what are you going to do about it? He looked up at me, conflict warring in his eyes. I need to talk to Lila. There has to be an explanation. Eli, I pleaded. You heard the tapes. There's no explaining that away. She's my wife, Mom. The mother of my child. I can't just what? I interrupted. Protect your son? Be a father? Eli flinched as if I'd slapped him. That's not fair. No, what's not fair is what's happening to Jonah, I retorted. He needs you to step up, Eli. To be his advocate, his protector. And what if you're wrong? Eli challenged. What if this is all some misunderstanding? I leaned forward, my voice low and intense. Then prove me wrong.
But don't you dare ignore this, Eli.
Your son's life, his future, depends on what you do next. Eli stood, his face a mask of turmoil. I need time to think, to process all this. As he headed for the door, I called out, Eli, remember, Jonah is the victim here. Not Lila, not you, and certainly not me. Whatever you decide, put him first. After Eli left, I sank onto the couch, emotionally drained. I'd done what I set out to do, present the evidence to Eli. But would it be enough? Would he find the strength to confront Lila and protect Jonah? My phone chimed with a text from Jonah. Grandma, something's wrong. Dad came home, looking upset. Mom's yelling. I'm scared. My heart raced. Things were coming to a head, and fast. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. I would do whatever it took to keep Jonah safe, even if it meant tearing this family apart to save it. Jonah's text message sent me into a panic. I grabbed my keys and raced to Eli's house, my heart pounding with every mile. As I pulled up, I could hear shouting even from the driveway. I burst through the front door without knocking. The scene that greeted me was chaos. Lila was screaming at Eli, her face contorted with rage. Eli stood there, pale and shaken, while Jonah cowered in the corner, his hands over his ears. You believe that interfering old witch over your own wife. Lila shrieked. Lila, please, Eli pleaded. We need to talk about this calmly. Talk. There's nothing to talk about. Your mother has poisoned you against me. I stepped forward. That's enough, Lila. This ends now. She whirled on me, eyes blazing. This is all your fault. You've ruined everything. The only thing I've done is expose the truth, I said firmly. Eli, are you going to stand there and let this continue? Eli looked torn, his gaze darting between Lila and Jonah. I don't know what to believe anymore. Believe your son, I urged. Look at him, Eli. Really look. As if seeing Jonah for the first time, Eli's eyes widened. He took in his son's trembling form, the fear etched on his young face. Jonah, Eli said softly, taking a step towards him. Lila intercepted, grabbing Eli's arm. Don't you dare. He's just being dramatic, like always. Something in Eli snapped. He wrenched his arm free.
No, Lila.
This isn't drama. This is our son, terrified in his own home. Eli, open your eyes, I pleaded. Jonah needs you to be his father, not just Lila's husband. For a moment, the room was silent save for Jonah's muffled sobs. Then Eli straightened, a resolve I hadn't seen in years settling over his features. Jonah, go pack a bag, he said quietly. You're going to stay with Grandma for a while. Lila's face drained of color. What? You can't do that. I can and I am, Eli replied. We need some time apart, Lila. All of us. As Jonah scurried upstairs, Lila turned on me, her voice low and menacing. You'll regret this, Marlo. I'll make sure of it. I met her gaze steadily. The only thing I regret is not seeing through you sooner. Eli stepped between us. That's enough. Lila, we'll talk tomorrow. For now, I think it's best if you stay with your sister. Lila's mouth opened and closed, shock replacing anger. You're choosing them over me? Your own wife. I'm choosing our son, Eli said firmly. And it's about time I did. As Lila stormed out, slamming the door behind her, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. But I knew this was just the beginning. Jonah came downstairs, clutching a hastily packed duffel bag. His eyes were red-rimmed, but there was a glimmer of hope there too. Eli knelt in front of him. I'm so sorry, son. I should have seen what was happening. I should have protected you. Jonah threw his arms around his father, breaking down in sobs. Eli held him tight, his own tears falling freely. I watched them, my heart aching. We had a long road ahead, but for the first time in months, I felt hope. As we left the house, Eli turned to me. Mom, I don't know how to thank you. If you hadn't pushed. I squeezed his hand. You're doing the right thing now, Eli. That's what matters. Driving home with Jonah beside me and Eli following in his car, I knew we were at a turning point. The confrontation had been painful, but necessary. Now came the hard part, healing the wounds Lila had inflicted and rebuilding this fractured family. But looking at Jonah's peaceful face as he dozed in the passenger seat, I knew it was worth it. Whatever came next, we would face it together. And Lila? She was about to learn that messing with my family was the biggest mistake she'd ever made. The days following Jonah's move to my house were a whirlwind of emotions. Eli spent every free moment with us, his eyes constantly darting to Jonah as if afraid he might disappear. The change in Jonah was subtle but unmistakable. His shoulders gradually relaxed, his smile appeared more frequently, and he began to speak up without flinching. One evening, as Jonah was engrossed in a video game, Eli pulled me aside. Mom, I need to talk to Lila, he said, his voice low and strained. I can't keep avoiding this. I nodded, squeezing his arm. You're doing the right thing, Eli. Do you want me to come with you? He shook his head. No, I need to do this alone. But, can you keep Jonah here tonight? Just in case things get heated. My heart clenched at the implication, but I agreed. As Eli left, I couldn't shake the feeling that this confrontation would change everything. Hours passed with no word from Eli. Jonah had gone to bed, but I couldn't sleep, pacing the living room. Just after midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from Eli. It's over. Coming back now. Relief flooded through me, followed quickly by concern. What had happened? Eli arrived looking utterly drained, his eyes red-rimmed. Without a word, he collapsed onto the couch beside me. Eli? I prompted gently. What happened? He took a shuddering breath. It was... God, Mom, it was awful. I confronted Lila about everything, the emotional abuse, the manipulation. She denied it at first, then she just exploded. I listened in horror as Eli recounted the argument. Lila had raged, accusing him of betrayal, blaming me for poisoning their family. This is your fault, Eli. Eli mimicked Lila's words. Your mother has poisoned our family. She's turned you and Jonah against me. What did you say? I asked, dreading the answer. Eli's eyes met mine, a mix of pain and determination in them. I told her it was over, that I couldn't be with someone who hurt our son like that. I asked for a divorce. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. I reached out, pulling Eli into a tight embrace as he finally broke down, his body shaking with sobs. I failed him, Mom. Eli choked out. I should have seen it sooner. Protected him better. You're protecting him now, I assured him. That's what matters. As Eli's tears subsided, a new resolve seemed to settle over him. Lila threatened to fight for custody, he said. She said she'd ruin us all if I tried to take Jonah away from her. A chill ran down my spine. She won't win, I said firmly. We have evidence of her abuse. We'll fight this, Eli. Together. Eli nodded, exhaustion etched on his face. I know. It's just, how did we get here, Mom? How did I not see what was happening in my own home? I had no easy answers for him. Instead, I squeezed his hand. What matters now is moving forward.
Healing.
Both you and Jonah. As if summoned by our conversation, we heard a small voice from the stairs.
Dad.
Jonah stood there, looking small and vulnerable in his oversized pajamas. Eli opened his arms, and Jonah flew into them, clinging tightly. "It's okay, buddy," Eli murmured. "Everything's going to be okay now." Watching them, I felt a fierce protectiveness surge through me. Lila's threats echoed in my mind, but I pushed them aside. We had a long road ahead: custody battles, therapy, rebuilding trust. But in that moment, seeing Eli and Jonah together, I knew we'd get through it. As the night wore on, with Jonah nestled between Eli and me on the couch, I allowed myself a moment of cautious hope. The worst was over, but the real work of healing was just beginning. Whatever Lila threw at us next, we'd face it as a family, stronger and more united than ever before. The weeks following Eli's confrontation with Lila were a delicate balancing act. Jonah remained with me, while Eli split his time between work, visiting us, and dealing with the impending divorce proceedings. The change in Jonah was remarkable, like watching a flower slowly unfurl after a long winter. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, I heard laughter floating in from the backyard. Peering out the window, I saw Jonah and Eli engaged in an impromptu game of catch, their faces alight with genuine joy. It was a sight I hadn't witnessed in far too long. Later, after Eli had gone home and Jonah was getting ready for bed, I knocked gently on his door. "Can I come in, sweetheart?" Jonah nodded, patting the spot next to him on the bed. As I sat down, he leaned against me, a gesture that made my heart swell. "How are you feeling, Jonah?" I asked softly. "About everything that's happened?" He was quiet for a moment, fidgeting with the edge of his blanket. I feel different, Grandma. Like I can breathe again." His words echoed my thoughts from earlier. "That's good, honey. You know you're safe here, right?" Jonah nodded, then hesitated. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course, anything." He took a deep breath. "Mom, she used to tell me things. About you, about Dad. She said you didn't really love me, that I was just a burden to everyone." My heart clenched painfully, but I kept my voice steady.
Oh, Jonah.
That couldn't be further from the truth. You're Dad, and I love you more than anything in this world. "I know that now," Jonah said, his voice stronger. "Being here, with you and Dad, it's like I'm remembering who I really am. Does that make sense?" I hugged him tightly, blinking back tears. "It makes perfect sense, sweetheart." As the days passed, Jonah continued to open up, revealing more about the extent of Lila's manipulation. It was like watching a weight being lifted from his shoulders with each confession. Eli noticed the change too. One afternoon, as we watched Jonah laughing with a neighbor's kid, something he wouldn't have done weeks ago, Eli turned to me, his eyes shining. "Mom, I can't believe the difference," he said. "It's like I'm seeing the real Jonah for the first time in years." I squeezed his hand. "He's healing, Eli. You both are." Eli nodded, a mix of emotions playing across his face. "I've been thinking about the future, about what's best for Jonah. And," I prompted gently, "I want to fight for full custody," Eli said, his jaw set with determination. "Seeing him here, with you, I realize now how toxic our home environment was. Jonah needs stability, love, support. He needs us." Pride swelled in my chest. "I'm with you every step of the way, Eli. We'll do whatever it takes to keep Jonah safe and happy." That evening, as we sat around the dinner table, a scene that was becoming beautifully routine, Jonah suddenly put down his fork. "Dad?" "Grandma," he said, his voice small but steady. I don't want to go back. To live with Mom, I mean, can I stay here? With both of you?" The vulnerability in his eyes nearly broke me. Eli reached out, clasping Jonah's hand. "That's exactly what we want to, buddy," he said. "We're going to make sure you're safe and happy no matter what." Jonah's face lit up with a smile that reached his eyes, a rare sight in recent years. "Really? You promise?" "We promise," I said firmly, including myself in this pact. As I looked at Eli and Jonah, united and healing, I felt a surge of determination. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Lila wouldn't give up without a fight, but we'd face it together. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to truly believe that everything would be okay. Jonah's words from earlier echoed in my mind. "Grandma, I feel like I can finally breathe here." It was more than just a house. It was a sanctuary where love and healing could flourish. And I was determined to protect it at all costs. The courthouse loomed before us, an imposing structure that seemed to embody the weight of the moment. Eli stood beside me, his jaw set with determination. Jonah, sandwiched between us, gripped our hands tightly. "Ready?" I asked softly. Jonah nodded, his eyes reflecting a mix of fear and resolve. "As long as you're both with me." We entered the building, the click of our shoes echoing in the marble hallway. Our lawyer met us at the courtroom door, her face serious but confident. "Remember," she said, "stick to the facts. The evidence is on our side." As we took our seats, I caught sight of Lila across the room. Her once immaculate appearance was disheveled, her eyes darting around wildly. For a moment, our gazes locked, and I saw a flicker of something, desperation, perhaps, or regret, before her mask of anger slammed back into place. The proceedings began, a blur of legal jargon and testimonies. Eli spoke eloquently about his awakening to Lila's abuse, his voice breaking as he recounted the changes he'd seen in Jonah. When it was Jonah's turn to speak, my heart swelled with pride at his courage. "Living with my mom was like drowning," Jonah said, his voice small but steady. "But now, with Dad and Grandma, I can breathe again. I feel safe. I feel loved." Lila's outburst came suddenly, her shrill voice cutting through the courtroom. "This is all lies. They've turned my son against me. Marlo has poisoned our family." As the judge called for order, I saw the last of Lila's support crumble. Her own sister, seated in the gallery, shook her head in dismay, finally seeing Lila for who she truly was. The judge's ruling came swiftly: full custody to Eli, with supervised visitation for Lila pending completion of therapy and parenting classes. As the gavel fell, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It was over. We had won. Outside the courthouse, Jonah threw his arms around Eli and me, tears streaming down his face. "We did it," he whispered. "We're really a family now." Eli knelt down, looking Jonah in the eye. "We've always been a family, buddy. Now we just get to be the best version of ourselves." As we walked to the car, I spotted Iris waiting for us, a broad smile on her face. She hugged me tightly, whispering, "I'm so proud of you, Marlo. You fought for what matters most." That evening, as we sat around my dining room table, now our dining room table, I looked at the faces of my son and grandson. There were still shadows in their eyes, scars that would take time to heal. But there was also hope and love and the promise of a brighter future. Eli raised his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said. "And to the strongest woman I know, my mom, who taught me what it really means to fight for family." I felt tears prick my eyes as Jonah added, "And to never giving up, even when things seem impossible." As we clinked our glasses together, I was struck by the truth of Jonah's words. We had faced seemingly insurmountable odds, but our love and determination had seen us through. Later, as I tucked Jonah into bed, a nightly ritual I now treasured, he looked up at me with eyes full of trust. "Grandma," he said softly, "do you think Mom will ever change?" I sat on the edge of his bed, choosing my words carefully. "I don't know, sweetheart. But what I do know is that you are safe and loved and surrounded by people who will always protect you." Jonah nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "I know. Sometimes the hardest truths lead to the strongest bonds, right?" I blinked back tears, recognizing my own words reflected back at me. "That's right, my brave boy."
And our bond?
"It's unbreakable." As I closed Jonah's door, I found Eli waiting in the hallway. Without a word, he pulled me into a tight embrace. We stood there, holding each other, two generations united by love and the shared experience of overcoming adversity. Our family had been tested, broken, and reforged. We emerged stronger, our bonds deeper than ever before. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew we would face them together, a family bound not just by blood, but by choice, resilience, and unwavering love.
Blythe, your husband isn't who you think he is. Dr. Monroe's words hit me like a freight train. I blinked, trying to process what he'd just said. The sterile clinic walls seemed to close in around me. I'm sorry, what? I managed to stammer. Dr. Monroe leaned forward, his eyes filled with concern. I've uncovered some troubling information about Harvey's past. There's evidence of his involvement in a fraudulent scheme. I felt compelled to tell you, given the potential danger. My mind raced. Harvey, my quiet, dependable husband of 5 years, involved in fraud? It didn't make sense. There must be some mistake, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Monroe shook his head. I wish there was. But the evidence is clear. Blythe, I urge you to consider your safety. Harvey's past actions suggest he may not be the man you believe him to be. I stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over the chair. I need to go, I muttered, fumbling for my purse. As I rushed out of the clinic, my world tilted on its axis. The bustling street outside felt surreal, like I'd stepped into someone else's life. My name is Blythe, and I just found out my husband might be a criminal. I walked aimlessly, my thoughts a jumbled mess. How could this be happening? Harvey and I had built a life together. Sure, it wasn't perfect, but whose marriage was? We had our routines, our quiet evenings, our shared dreams for the future. But as I walked, doubts began to creep in. The way Harvey always changed the subject when I asked about his past. The tension that filled the air whenever his family visited. The locked drawer in his desk that I'd never questioned. I found myself in front of our modest suburban home, staring at it like I'd never seen it before. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside. Harvey, I called out, my voice shaky. He appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. Hey, Han, how was the doctor's appointment? I studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. But all I saw was the same man I'd woken up next to for the past 5 years. It was interesting, I said carefully. Dr. Monroe had some concerns. Harvey's brow furrowed. Concerns? About what? I hesitated, torn between confronting him and playing it safe. About your medical history, I said finally. He mentioned some discrepancies. A flicker of something, fear? Anger? Passed over Harvey's face before he smiled. Oh, that. Probably just a mix-up with the paperwork. You know how those things can get confused. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Was he lying? Or was Dr. Monroe mistaken? Listen, Harvey said, moving closer. I've got to run out for a bit. Promised to help Margot with some stuff at her place. You'll be okay here? Sure, I said, forcing a smile. Go ahead. As soon as the door closed behind him, I sprang into action. I had to know the truth. I headed for his desk, determined to find answers. Little did I know, my search for the truth would unravel everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and the man I called my husband. I stared at the locked drawer in Harvey's desk, my heart pounding. The key wasn't in its usual hiding spot. Of course not. Why would Harvey make it easy for me? Frustrated, I slumped into his chair, my mind racing back to our wedding day 5 years ago. It had been a small, quiet affair, just us and a justice of the peace. No family, no friends. At the time, I'd thought it romantic. Now, I wondered if it had been the first red flag. It'll be our little secret, Harvey had whispered, slipping the ring on my finger. I'd been so desperate for companionship, so tired of my solitary life, that I'd ignored the warning signs. The way Harvey dodged questions about his past. The tense phone calls with his sister Margot that always ended abruptly when I entered the room. A knock at the door startled me from my reverie. I froze, panic rising in my throat. Had Harvey forgotten something? Blythe, you in there? It was Gideon, my manager from work. Relief washed over me as I hurried to answer. Gideon, what are you doing here? He held up a file. You left this at the office. Thought you might need it for tomorrow's presentation. I took the file, grateful for the distraction. Thanks. Do you want to come in for a coffee? Gideon hesitated, then nodded. As we sat in the kitchen, I found myself studying him. We'd worked together for years, and he'd always been a steady presence in my life. Unlike Harvey's family, who, everything okay, Blythe? Gideon's voice cut through my thoughts. You seem distracted. I sighed, debating how much to reveal. It's complicated. Harvey and I were going through some things. Gideon's expression softened. I'm sorry to hear that. Is there anything I can do? Before I could answer, the front door slammed. Harvey's voice boomed through the house. Blythe, whose car is that in the driveway? He appeared in the kitchen doorway, his eyes narrowing at the sight of Gideon. What's going on here? Gideon just dropped off some work files, I explained, hating the defensive note in my voice. Harvey's gaze flickered between us, suspicion evident. Right. Well, don't let me interrupt. As he stalked off, the tension in the room was palpable. Gideon cleared his throat. I should go. See you tomorrow, Blythe. After he left, I braced myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. Sure enough, Harvey reappeared, his face thunderous. What was that about? He demanded. Nothing, I insisted. Gideon's my colleague, you know that. Harvey scoffed. Right, and I'm sure he just happened to stop by when I was out. The accusation stung, but it also ignited a spark of anger. What about you? I shot back. How was Margot? A flicker of something, guilt? Fear? Crossed Harvey's face before he masked it. Fine. What's that supposed to mean? I took a deep breath, deciding to push further. I don't know, Harvey. You tell me. Seems like there's a lot you're not saying these days. The air between us crackled with tension. For a moment, I thought Harvey might confess, might offer some explanation for the growing web of lies I sensed around us. Instead, he turned away. I'm going to bed. Don't wait up. As I watched him go, a chill settled over me. The man I'd married, the life I thought we'd built together, it was all starting to feel like a carefully constructed illusion. And I was determined to tear it down, no matter the cost. I pulled out my phone, hesitating for just a moment before dialing. Gideon? It's me. I need your help with something. I stood in our bedroom, staring at the empty space where my grandmother's antique necklace used to be. My heart raced as I frantically searched through drawers and boxes, hoping I'd simply misplaced it. But deep down, I knew the truth. Harvey, I called out, my voice trembling. Have you seen my necklace? He appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of concern. The one from your grandmother? No, I haven't. Are you sure you didn't leave it at work? I shook my head, fighting back tears. It's always here. Always. Harvey's brow furrowed. Maybe it fell behind the dresser? Here, let me look. As he made a show of searching, I watched him carefully. Was that guilt in his eyes? Or was I seeing what I wanted to see? I'm sorry, honey, he said finally. I don't see it anywhere. I nodded numbly, my mind racing. First Dr. Monroe's warning, then the missing necklace. What was happening to my life? Later that day, I decided to check our joint bank account. What I saw made my blood run cold. Thousands of dollars were missing, with no explanation. I called the bank immediately, my hands shaking as I held the phone. There must be some mistake, I insisted. The customer service representative's voice was sympathetic, but firm. I'm sorry, Mrs. Calloway, but these transactions were authorized using your account information. There's no sign of fraud. As I hung up, a terrible realization dawned on me. Harvey. It had to be Harvey. That night, as we sat at the dinner table, I studied my husband. His behavior had become increasingly erratic over the past few weeks. Late nights at work, hushed phone conversations, unexplained absences. Everything okay? Harvey asked, noticing my stare. I forced a smile. Just tired. Long day at work. He nodded, returning to his meal. I watched as he shoveled food into his mouth, wondering how I could have been so blind. How long had this been going on? What else was he hiding? After dinner, Harvey announced he was going out. Margot needs help with something, he said vaguely. As soon as the door closed behind him, I sprang into action. I'd had enough of the lies and secrecy. It was time to get answers. I called Gideon, my voice urgent. I need your help. Can you come over? 20 minutes later, Gideon arrived with a small package. Are you sure about this, Blythe? He asked, concern etched on his face. I nodded firmly. I need to know the truth. Together, we installed hidden cameras throughout the house. In the living room, the kitchen, Harvey's study. As we worked, Gideon filled me in on what he'd discovered. I did some digging, he said quietly. Harvey's been making regular cash withdrawals from an account you don't know about. And there are phone records showing frequent calls to a number I couldn't trace. My heart sank. So it's true. He's been lying to me all along. Gideon placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. I'm so sorry, Blythe. What are you going to do? I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I'm going to catch him in the act. And then I'm going to make him pay for what he's done. As Gideon left, I sat alone in the darkened house, surrounded by hidden cameras and shattered trust. The woman I'd been just a few weeks ago, trusting, naive, content in her marriage, seemed like a stranger now. I heard Harvey's key in the lock and quickly composed myself. As he walked in, I greeted him with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "How was Margot?" I asked innocently. Harvey shrugged. "Fine. Just needed help moving some furniture." Another lie. I nodded, playing along. "That's nice of you to help." As we settled in for the evening, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The cameras were rolling, capturing every moment. Soon I'd have the evidence I needed. And then, Harvey Calloway would learn that he'd picked the wrong woman to deceive. My hands trembled as I inserted the memory card into my laptop. 3 days of footage from the hidden cameras lay before me, promising answers I both craved and dreaded. I took a deep breath and pressed play. At first, it was mundane. Harvey moving through the house, talking on the phone, watching TV. But then, on the second day, everything changed. Harvey entered his study, looking furtively over his shoulder. He pulled out a burner phone I'd never seen before and dialed. "Margot? It's me. We need to move faster." My blood ran cold as I listened to their conversation. They spoke in hushed tones about bank accounts, transferred funds, and a plan to get out clean. "Blythe suspects nothing," Harvey assured Margot. "By the time she figures it out, we'll be long gone." Tears stung my eyes as the betrayal sank in. Not just Harvey, but Margot too. How long had they been plotting against me? I fast-forwarded through hours of footage until I saw Harvey sneaking into our bedroom. He went straight to my jewelry box, removing my grandmother's necklace and other valuable pieces. "That bastard," I hissed, clenching my fists. The final blow came when I watched Harvey in a heated discussion with someone on his burner phone. "Listen, Florence," he snapped. "I don't care what you think of Blythe. This isn't about her. It's about securing our future." Florence, Harvey's mother. She was in on it too. I sat back, my mind reeling. The entire Calloway family had been conspiring against me, draining my accounts, stealing my possessions, all while I remained blissfully unaware. A knock at the door startled me. "Blythe, you in there?" It was Gideon. I quickly closed the laptop and wiped my eyes. "Come in," I called, trying to steady my voice. Gideon entered, concern etched on his face. "I came as soon as I got your message." "What did you find?" I couldn't hold back anymore. The tears flowed freely as I recounted everything I'd seen and heard. Gideon listened, his expression darkening with each revelation. "My God, Blythe," he said when I finished. "I'm so sorry. What are you going to do?" I stood up, a newfound resolve stealing my spine. "I'm going to confront them. All of them. At the family dinner this weekend." Gideon looked alarmed. "Is that safe? Maybe we should go to the police first." I shook my head. "No. I need to see their faces when I expose their lies. I need them to know that I'm not the weak, naive woman they thought I was." "At least let me come with you," Gideon pleaded. "For backup." I considered his offer. Having Gideon there would provide some comfort, but this was my battle to fight. "Thank you, but no. I need to do this alone." As Gideon left, I turned back to the laptop, steeling myself to watch more footage. I needed to gather every scrap of evidence, every damning conversation. Hours passed as I pieced together the full extent of their deception. By the time Harvey returned home, I had a complete picture of their scheme. "Hey, honey," Harvey called as he walked in. "Everything okay? You look tired." I plastered on a fake smile. "Just a long day at work. How about you? How was your day?" Harvey launched into a fabricated story about his day at the factory. I nodded along, marveling at how easily the lies fell from his lips. As we prepared for bed that night, I watched Harvey with new eyes. This man, who I'd loved and trusted for 5 years, was nothing but a fraud. A thief. A liar. But soon, very soon, he would learn that he'd underestimated me. The family dinner was in 2 days, and I would be ready. Ready to unmask the Calloways and reclaim my life. As I drifted off to sleep, a small, satisfied smile played on my lips. The tables were about to turn, and Harvey wouldn't know what hit him. The Calloway family dinner was in full swing, but the cheerful chatter felt like nails on a chalkboard to me. I sat at the table, surrounded by liars and thieves, my stomach churning with a mixture of anger and anticipation. Harvey sat to my right, laughing at one of Margot's jokes. Florence, his mother, eyed me with her usual disdain from across the table. If only they knew what was coming. "More wine, Blythe?" Harvey asked, reaching for my glass. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Please." As he poured, I caught Margot watching us, a glint of something sinister in her eyes. She knew. They all knew. But they had no idea that I knew too. "So, Blythe," Florence began, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "How's work? Still slaving away at that pharmaceutical company?" I took a sip of wine, steeling myself. Actually, Florence, I've been quite busy lately. Uncovering some interesting information. The table fell silent. Harvey's hand froze midair, the wine bottle tilting dangerously. Oh! Margot leaned forward, her smile tight. What kind of information? I met her gaze steadily. The kind that involves missing jewelry, drained bank accounts, and secret phone calls. The color drained from Harvey's face. Blythe, what are you talking about? I turned to him, my voice ice cold. I think you know exactly what I'm talking about, Harvey. Or should I play the recordings for everyone? Chaos erupted. Harvey jumped to his feet, knocking over his chair. Margot's wine glass shattered on the floor. Florence's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. You've been spying on me? Harvey shouted, his face contorted with rage. I stood up slowly, my calm demeanor a stark contrast to their panic. I prefer to call it protecting myself. From all of you. Margot recovered first, her manipulative instincts kicking in. Blythe, dear, I think you've misunderstood something. We were planning a surprise for you, Dash. Save it, Margot, I snapped. I heard everything. The plans to drain my accounts, to steal my possessions. The scheme to leave me with nothing while you all rode off into the sunset. Florence found her voice at last. How dare you accuse us? After everything we've done for you, Dash. I laughed bitterly. Done for me? You've done nothing but plot against me from the day I married Harvey. Well, guess what? The meek, naive Blythe you thought you knew is gone. I turned to Harvey, my heart breaking even as my resolve strengthened. I trusted you. I loved you. And this is how you repay me. For a moment I saw a flicker of remorse in his eyes. But it was quickly replaced by cold calculation. You can't prove anything, he said flatly. I pulled out my phone, holding it up for all to see. Actually, I can. Every conversation, every secret meeting, every lie, it's all here. And copies have already been sent to my lawyer. The room fell deathly silent. I looked at each of them in turn, Harvey, Margot, Florence, seeing the realization dawn that their carefully laid plans were crumbling. So here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady. You're going to return every penny you stole from me. You're going to hand over my grandmother's necklace and any other items you've taken. And then, you're going to disappear from my life. For good. Margot tried one last time. Blythe, please, we can explain, Dash. Save it. I cut her off. I'm done with your explanations. I'm done with your lies. I'm done with all of you. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door, pausing to look back at the stunned faces of the Calloway family. Oh, and Harvey? I want a divorce. As I walked out into the cool night air, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The confrontation I'd dreaded for days was over, and I'd emerged victorious. But as the adrenaline faded, a new emotion took hold, a mix of sadness and determination. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of my fight for justice. And I was ready for whatever came next. I sat in Gideon's office, my hands trembling as I clutched a steaming cup of coffee. The events of the family dinner still echoed in my mind, a cacophony of accusations and shattered illusions. Blythe, there's something else you need to know, Gideon said, his voice heavy with reluctance. I looked up, bracing myself. What is it? Gideon hesitated, then pushed a folder across his desk. I had a private investigator look into Harvey's recent activities. What he found? Well, it's not good. With shaking hands, I opened the folder. Photos spilled out, Harvey with a young woman I'd never seen before. They were laughing, holding hands, kissing. My stomach lurched. Who is she? I whispered. Her name is Vanessa Reeves, Gideon replied. She's 28, works as a real estate agent. And from what we've gathered, Harvey's been seeing her for at least 6 months. The betrayal cut deep, reopening wounds I thought had begun to heal. So all this time while he was stealing from me, he was also planning a new life with her, Gideon finished gently. I'm so sorry, Blythe. I stood up abruptly, pacing the office. He was going to leave me. Use my money to start over with her. That bastard. Gideon watched me, concern etched on his face. What do you want to do? I stopped pacing, a cold determination settling over me. I want to destroy him. I want to take everything from him, just like he tried to do to me. Blythe, Gideon said cautiously. I understand you're hurt, but revenge isn't always the answer. I whirled on him. Isn't it? He lied to me, stole from me, cheated on me. He and his family tried to leave me with nothing. Why shouldn't I return the favor? Gideon stood, moving around the desk to face me. Because you're better than that. Don't let them turn you into something you're not. For a moment I wavered. Then I remembered the look on Harvey's face at the dinner, the cold calculation in his eyes. No, I said firmly. I'm done being the bigger person. It's time Harvey faced the consequences of his actions. I grabbed the folder, my mind racing. I need to meet this Vanessa. She deserves to know what kind of man she's really with. Gideon sighed, recognizing the futility of trying to change my mind. At least let me come with you. For support. I nodded, grateful for his unwavering presence in my life. As we left his office, a plan began to form in my mind. Harvey thought he could discard me and start a new life. I'd make sure that new life crumbled before it even began. We tracked Vanessa to a coffee shop downtown. As I watched her through the window, sipping her latte and checking her phone, a mix of emotions washed over me. Anger at Harvey, pity for this woman who had no idea what she was getting into, and a grim satisfaction at what I was about to do. Are you sure about this? Gideon asked one last time. I nodded, squaring my shoulders. It's time for the truth to come out. All of it. As I pushed open the door to the coffee shop, I felt a shift within me. The naive, trusting Blythe was gone. In her place stood a woman hardened by betrayal, driven by a thirst for justice. Or was it revenge? I approached Vanessa's table, my heart pounding. She looked up, confusion crossing her face. Can I help you? She asked. I sat down across from her, placing the folder on the table. My name is Blythe Calloway, and we need to talk about Harvey. Vanessa's eyes widened in recognition and fear. In that moment, I knew I held the power to shatter her world, just as mine had been shattered. The question was, could I go through with it? As I opened the folder, preparing to reveal Harvey's true nature, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. The woman staring back at me was a stranger, cold, determined, unforgiving. Was this really who I wanted to become? I sat across from Vanessa, the folder of damning evidence spread between us. Her face had drained of color as I methodically laid out Harvey's deceptions, his thefts, and his elaborate plans to start a new life with her using my stolen money. I had no idea, Vanessa whispered, her hands shaking as she picked up a photo of Harvey and me on our wedding day. He told me he was divorced. A pang of sympathy cut through my anger. He's been lying to both of us, I said, my voice softer than I'd intended. Suddenly, the coffee shop door burst open. Harvey stormed in, his face contorted with rage. What the hell do you think you're doing, Blythe? I stood, steeling myself for the confrontation. I'm telling the truth, Harvey. Something you should have done a long time ago. Harvey's eyes darted between Vanessa and me, panic replacing anger. Vanessa, baby, don't listen to her. She's just jealous, trying to ruin what we have. Vanessa stood up slowly, her voice trembling. Is it true, Harvey? Did you steal from your wife? Were you planning to use that money to start over with me? Harvey's facade crumbled. I can explain. It's not what you think. It's exactly what she thinks. I cut in, my voice ice cold. You're a liar and a thief, Harvey. And now everyone knows it. As if on cue, Margot burst into the coffee shop, followed closely by Florence. The look of horror on their faces told me they'd overheard everything. Harvey, what have you done? Florence wailed, her earlier disdain for me forgotten in the face of her son's exposed deceit. Margot turned to me, her usual smug expression replaced by desperation. Blythe, please. We can work this out. As a family. I laughed bitterly. Family? You were never my family. You were all in on this scheme from the beginning. Harvey made a last-ditch effort to salvage the situation. Vanessa, please. I love you. Everything I did was for us, for our future. Vanessa stepped back, disgust evident on her face. Our future? Built on lies and stolen money? I want nothing to do with you, Harvey. It's over. As Vanessa stormed out, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The truth was finally out, and Harvey was facing the consequences of his actions. Florence collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Margot stood frozen, the reality of their ruined plans sinking in. And Harvey? Harvey looked broken, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Blythe, he pleaded, reaching for me. I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. We can start over, make things right. I stepped back, out of his reach. No, Harvey. We can't. It's too late for that. As I turned to leave, I caught sight of Gideon waiting by the door, a silent pillar of support. I walked towards him, ready to leave this chapter of my life behind. Harvey's voice stopped me. You've ruined everything, he spat, his tone venomous. I hope you're happy now. I turned back one last time, meeting his gaze. This isn't about happiness, Harvey. It's about justice. And you brought this on yourself. As Gideon and I stepped out into the sunlight, I felt a mix of emotions wash over me. Relief that the truth was finally out. Sadness for the years I'd lost to Harvey's deception. And a glimmer of hope for what the future might hold. Are you okay? Gideon asked gently. I took a deep breath, considering the question. No, I admitted. But I will be. As we walked away from the coffee shop, leaving behind the wreckage of Harvey's lies, I realized that this wasn't just an ending. It was also a beginning, a chance to reclaim my life, to rebuild on my own terms. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still legal battles to face, wounds to heal. But for the first time in years, I felt truly free. The woman who had walked into that coffee shop seeking revenge was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace whatever came next. I glanced at Gideon, feeling a surge of gratitude for his unwavering support. "Thank you," I said softly. "For everything." He smiled, a warmth in his eyes that I'd never fully appreciated before. "Anytime, Blythe. Anytime." As we walked on, I felt the first stirrings of something new. Not just hope, but possibility. The future stretched out before me, uncertain but full of promise. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to face it head-on. 6 months after the confrontation at the coffee shop, I stood in my new apartment, surrounded by boxes and the promise of a fresh start. The divorce was finalized, Harvey's deceit fully exposed, and I was finally free to rebuild my life on my own terms. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. I opened it to find Gideon, a warm smile on his face and a bottle of champagne in his hand. "Thought we should celebrate your new beginning," he said, stepping inside. As we sat on my couch, sipping champagne from mismatched mugs, the glasses were still packed away. I felt a sense of peace wash over me. "I can't believe how much has changed," I mused. "A year ago, I thought I knew exactly what my life was. Now?" Gideon nodded. "Now you're free. Free to be who you really are, without Harvey's lies holding you back." I smiled, realizing the truth in his words. You know, when Dr. Monroe first warned me about Harvey, I was terrified. I thought my world was ending. But really, it was just beginning. We talked late into the night, reminiscing about the tumultuous journey of the past year. The shock of Harvey's betrayal, the pain of uncovering his lies, the strength I'd found in standing up to him and his family. "I'm proud of you, Blythe," Gideon said softly. "You've been through hell, but you've come out stronger." I felt a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the champagne. "I couldn't have done it without you, Gideon. You've been my rock through all of this." Our eyes met, and for a moment, I saw something more than friendship in his gaze. But he looked away, clearing his throat. "So, what's next for Blythe Calloway?" he asked, changing the subject. I took a deep breath, excitement bubbling up inside me. "Well, I've been thinking about that job offer from the research division. I think I'm ready to take on a new challenge." Gideon beamed. "That's fantastic. They'd be lucky to have you." As the night wore on, our conversation drifted to lighter topics. We laughed about office gossip and shared dreams for the future. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive, unburdened by secrets and lies. When Gideon finally stood to leave, I walked him to the door. We hesitated, the air between us charged with unspoken possibilities. "Blythe," Gideon started, then paused. I'm glad you're doing well." I smiled, understanding the words he couldn't say. "Me too, Gideon. Thank you for everything." After he left, I stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. My reflection stared back at me, and I hardly recognized the woman I saw. Gone was the naive, trusting Blythe who had let Harvey manipulate her. In her place stood a woman who had faced betrayal and emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient. I thought about Gideon, about the potential for something more between us. But I wasn't ready, not yet. I needed time to heal, to rediscover who I was without Harvey's shadow looming over me. As I turned away from the window, my gaze fell on a framed photo of my grandmother. I picked it up, running my fingers over the familiar face. "You'd be proud of me, Grandma," I whispered. "I finally found the strength you always said I had." Placing the photo back, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. The past year had been a crucible, burning away the illusions and leaving behind something stronger, purer. I was no longer defined by Harvey's lies or his family's manipulation. I was simply Blythe, survivor, fighter, and architect of my own destiny. As I crawled into bed that night, I felt a sense of anticipation for what the future might hold. There would be challenges ahead, no doubt. But for the first time in years, I was excited to face them. Because now I knew the truth. I was capable of far more than I'd ever imagined. The woman who had once been content to live in Harvey's shadow was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone ready to step into the light and embrace all the possibilities that lay ahead. And as I drifted off to sleep, a smile played on my lips. Tomorrow was a new day, full of promise and potential. and I couldn't wait to see what it would bring.